Hello and welcome to the Pursuit Zone. I am your host, Paul Schmid, and I interview explorers that dream big, break out of their comfort zones, and take on ambitious pursuits. This is episode 207 with Greg Gransden. In 2018, Greg was serving as a filmmaker on a small team that set out to recreate a 1920s-era mountaineering expedition in British Columbia. We talk about how he got his start in filmmaking, what it was like to be on the expedition, and his process for bringing the film from an idea to the screen. Let's start the show, and let me introduce Greg. In the late 1920s, the husband and wife duo Don and Phyllis Monday believed there was an undiscovered peak in the Coast Range, about 200 miles north of Vancouver, which was an uncharted part of the province. They called it Mystery Mountain and set out to find it. They achieved their goal in 1928, reaching the lower summit of Mystery Mountain, which became known as Mount Waddington, the highest peak inside British Columbia, at 13,186 feet. About 90 years later, a team of 6 set out to retrace the Munday's expedition to Mystery Mountain using only 1920s-era equipment. Greg Gransden directed the documentary film about the adventure titled The Mystery Mountain Project, which is available to view online. You can learn more about the film and the team at the CanadianASociety.ca. Greg Gransden, welcome to the Pursuit Zone.
Thank you. I'm really glad to be here.
Greg, how did you get started in filmmaking?
Well, what happened was my wife, who was a journalist at the time, was sent to Mexico City as the CBC correspondent for, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. We had young children at the time, and of course I went along, but I was looking for something to do while I was in Mexico City. And through the CBC, I got a freelance gig. It was basically for a little show on their 24-hour news station, and it was in French. And basically what they did was they used freelancers, and they would give them a camera, and they'd tell them to go and find cultural stories or social stories. And you'd make these kind of short 22-minute documentaries. So they gave me a camera, they gave me some tapes and a tripod and about, 2 hours worth of training. And they let me go, and I just started making documentaries while I was in Mexico City.
Man, that sounds fun.
It was really fun because I could really just explore whatever I thought was interesting. So I did a documentary on Mexican wrestling, lucha libre. I did a couple of documentaries about Mexican popular music. I did a documentary about Mexican comic books. It gave me a way to explore Mexico City, to meet people from all around the city, from the cultural scene and the social scene. And I got my first experience, shooting and editing documentaries.
Now, did you go to university?
I did go to university. I studied Russian language and literature at the University of Toronto, which led me to my first career, which was in journalism. So I was a freelance journalist in Russia during the early 1990s and Turkey and Austria. So the first part of my career was spent overseas, really working as a freelance print journalist.
Wow, you were in Russia in the early 90s. What a time to be there. Do you speak Russian?
I do speak Russian, but I've gotten very rusty, so I'd say I speak it very badly. But at the time, I spoke it relatively well, and I could work in Russian. And I have to say I really enjoyed living in Moscow. The Russians are really interesting people. They're in many ways an incredible people, and it's a fascinating city. And of course, a lot was going on. I was there when the Soviet Union collapsed. I saw for the first time tanks and soldiers in the streets. I mean, it was really a revolution.
Before this 2018 film, The Mystery Mountain Project, you worked on another film called Hobnails and Hemp, which was another sort of this recreation type of film. How did you get involved with that?
So the way that I got involved with my previous project, Hobnails and Hemp, was I'm a member of the Alpine Club of Canada. I started rock climbing a few years ago because my older son wanted to get into it. The Alpine Club of Canada has these cabins in different parts of the country, usually close to the rock face. I was spending the weekend at this Alpine Club cabin in a place called Bon Echo Provincial Park. It's in Ontario. It's a beautiful park with a gorgeous lake and these incredible cliffs just rising straight up out of the lake. And I had a camera with me, and I was doing some filming, and there was a guy there who'd thrown out his back, and he was sprawled next to the fire pit. But he saw me with my camera, and he said he was looking for a filmmaker for a project he was developing, which was to reenact this mountaineering expedition from 1916. And so that guy, his name is Brian Thompson, and he's the guy who organized that particular expedition and also the one that's the subject of the Mystery Mountain Project. So, so I got into it really completely by accident. But I should say that I'd seen a couple of years, I guess the previous year, I'd gone to see a movie called Meru, which was a mountaineering film by Jimmy Chin. And I'd seen it. I really enjoyed it. And I thought, wow, I'd really like to do something like that. I mean, rather naively, but it planted the seed in my mind.
Yeah, Meru, great film.
Meru is a really great film. And because my son wanted to get involved in climbing and mountaineering, we had met a professional mountaineer through my brother-in-law. And he had really inspired us. He'd inspired us to go out and take classes and take courses. He himself, he's a sponsored athlete for the North Face. And it just really got us going.
Before we get a little more into talking about how the film came together, we should learn a little bit more about this couple that the story, they're kind of at the heart of the story, which are Don and Phyllis Monday. What can you say about this pair?
Don and Phyllis Monday were really an incredible couple. Don was a World War I veteran. He had been wounded during the war. He still had shrapnel in his left arm, and his left arm was actually partly paralyzed. He had chronic lung damage from poison gas, but that didn't stop him. He and his wife Phyllis made more than 40 first ascents in the mountains of British Columbia. There was a mountaineering culture at the time in the 1920s, and very often you would have maybe wealthy businessmen or wealthy lawyers who would pay a guide to go climbing in the mountains with them. But Don and Phyllis were not wealthy at all. They lived off of Don's writing. He used to write for the Alpine Journal and for one of the Vancouver newspapers. They made all their own mountaineering equipment. They made their own packs. They sewed their own tents. They even built their own boat to get to the mountains. So they were incredibly resourceful and incredibly passionate about the outdoors and about mountaineering. And they were also incredibly physically tough. Phyllis was really an Amazon. Their romance was sparked when they were climbing in the mountains, either with the British Columbia Mountaineering Club or the Alpine Club of Canada. They were climbing in the mountains one day with a group of friends, and Don lost his footing, and Phyllis rushed in and prevented him from sliding down the mountain. So she saved his life. And for him, it was like love at first sight. I mean, these were just incredibly physically tough people, incredibly resourceful, had incredible fortitude, and they were just so positive and passionate about the outdoors. Just incredibly impressive.
I just did a little bit of a little wiki search of them, and Phyllis Monday. Wow, 1894 to 1990. What a lifespan! Almost the 100-year time frame. What she must have seen in her 96 years, I guess. Amazing.
Yeah, Phyllis lived a good long life, and there's if you go on YouTube, there's some interviews with her when she was in her old age. What I find a little bit, well, not really frustrating, but a shame in a way, is that there aren't any really good interviews of the two of them when they were younger. I mean, they were really just an incredible power couple of the outdoors. And you look at the photos of them, there's some wonderful archival images of Don and Phyllis. Phyllis was a very serious amateur photographer. She took a camera with her into the mountains, into the Waddington range. They even brought a 16 millimeter film camera and shot some film footage. And so there's some incredible images of Phyllis and Don and the mountains in the Royal British Columbia Museum. Just looking at their faces, their young faces, they're such a beautiful couple. There's a photograph of Don Munday in the Royal British Columbia Museum, and he's climbing up an ice face with like an ice axe, and it's almost vertical, and he has a bundle on his back. And when you read the caption to the photograph, you realize this bundle, it's not a backpack, it's a baby. Don and Phyllis, they had a baby, Edith, and as soon as she was 6 months old, they just strapped it to their backs and kept climbing mountains.
Is Edith still alive?
No, I don't think Edith is still alive. We've been actually trying to figure out what happened to her, but no, I don't think Edith is still alive. We've actually been trying to track down some of the Munday relatives, and I've sent out a few emails and Facebook messages, but I haven't heard anything back.
Now, the other part of the film is the landscape and the Coast Range. What should we know about this part of British Columbia?
The Coast Range stretches pretty much the entire coast of British Columbia. So if you're in Vancouver and you see mountains, that's the Coast Range. But where the film takes place is a part of the Coast Range that almost nobody goes to. These days it's called the Waddington Range, but it's in a very remote part of the province. The only people who go there regularly are loggers. Before I started doing mountaineering documentaries, I didn't even realize that British Columbia had many different mountain ranges. But when I think about the Coast Range, it really clicked when someone told me that this part of the Coast Range, this very remote, isolated, rugged part of the Coast Range, climbers refer to it as Canada's Himalayas. And they really are sort of these incredibly iconic mountains and glaciers, and it's incredibly rugged. And really only a handful of climbers go there every year. And there's something just very pristine about them in their remoteness and their isolation.
So you're going into this film, and you've done one of these period recreation pieces 2 years prior. Oh, by the way, congratulations, because, Hobnails and Hemp, you won Best Director Award for that. What was that experience like? Were you able to attend the festival?
No, unfortunately, I wasn't. It came as a complete surprise to me. What happened was we have a publicist who's part of the Canadian A Society. His name is Ivan, and he's Russian. His uncle works for a post-production house in Moscow, and Ivan said, look, we'll send the film to my uncle, we'll get it dubbed into Russian, and we'll submit it to this festival in Moscow. And I thought, wow, okay, sure, that sounds like fun. And so that's what happened. Then I got word that I'd won the Best Director prize at this festival, and it came as a complete surprise, and I would love to have gone. But the weekend of the ceremony, of the award ceremony, I was just starting work with this canoe tripping NGO in Ontario, and I couldn't really get away. It was lovely to get the award. It was lovely to get the recognition, and I just wish I could have been there with the Russian audience. Russians are so passionate about the outdoors. The summer before COVID, I attended mountaineering camp in the Rockies, and there was a Russian family there, and they were just incredible. The parents were in their 60s. The father had worked for the Russian Space Agency. He'd spent his whole career there. He was a colonel in the Russian Space Agency. He'd specialized in launching satellites. He had been based in Arkhangelsk, which is in northern Russia. It's close to the Arctic Circle. And very early in life, he'd gotten all sorts of wilderness accreditations and wilderness credentials. And he'd started climbing mountains with his children when they were very, very young. This Russian family, they were just so comfortable in the mountains. And their adult son was there with his fiancée. They got married later that summer on the summit of Mount Shasta. Russians have this incredible relationship with the wilderness.
I have a short Russian story. It's not that good of a story, but I was at Banff Mountain Film and Book Festival a handful of years ago, and there was a Russian climber that was there, and they were interviewing him in front of the audience. And I wish I could remember the guy's name. That kind of ruins the story that I don't have it. But I was just going to say that guy was intense. He was an intense guy.
Oh, yeah. The Russians can be very, very intense. I mean, I remember when my kids were young, I was reading Into Thin Air to them in bed at night. And I just loved doing like the Russian accent of the Russian climber. They really latched onto it. Like they still remember that Russian character from the book, the one who went out and tried to rescue some of the other climbers, and also just very, very intense, very focused. It's very Russian.
What knowledge did you gain from the making of the first film that you were able to bring into this Mystery Mountain Project film?
What I learned from filming that first mountaineering reenactment in 2016 was that most of the missteps and the mistakes and the painful adjustments were going to happen in the first 24 to 48 hours of the expedition. And so I would have to keep filming almost continuously during those first 48 hours. that proved to be the case with the Mystery Mountain project as well. So I was very aware going into it that the first, say, 24, 48 hours, 36 hours was going to be a period where the participants, the expedition members, were going to be getting used to this equipment, this vintage equipment. We're going to be making missteps and mistakes and having difficulties and encountering challenges that they hadn't anticipated. And that's exactly what happened in the first 3 days. Lots of unanticipated difficulties. And I predicted that those first 36 hours of the expedition would probably make up about a third of the film, a third of the final film. And that turned out to be correct.
The team of 6, and then there's also a couple of guys as a support crew in a helicopter. The team, they're having to do their pre-production work of their own. They're having to figure out where they're going to source this vintage equipment and so on. But you as a filmmaker, are you involved in that pre-production, or do you have, what pre-production work do you have to do before it's day one ready to start filming?
I'm not really involved in the pre-production for the reenactment itself. I mean, Brian keeps me abreast of things and he lets me know what's going on. And I have a sense of more or less of how he's going about it, because I know that he's talked to me about going to shop in army surplus stores and antique stores for some of this vintage gear. For me, in the run-up to the summer, in the run-up to the expedition, I had to really think about how I was going to film it. My day job is really as a screenwriter, and I'm not a professional cameraman. I don't really have any professional training on cameras. And so I had to answer really very basic questions about how I was going to shoot this thing. And the first one was which camera to use. I have quite a few friends who work in television, a few cameraman friends, and I asked around. Eventually, I settled on a camera called the Panasonic GH5. It's a wonderful camera. It's very robust. And this generation of digital DSLR cameras are just incredibly powerful, and you can shoot 4K video, which is high enough quality to go for broadcast television. So once I had the camera, the next question was, right, so how do I power it in the backcountry? I mean, obviously there's no electrical outlet. We're going to be very isolated for an entire month. How am I going to do this? The obvious answer was solar power, but then I checked the weather forecast and it was predicting rain for the entire month. So that wasn't going to work. I saw an ad for a portable water turbine that you could put into a stream or a river, but it looked like it was only powerful enough to recharge a cell phone. So that wasn't going to cut it. After that, I put out word on a Facebook forum asking people for suggestions. I mean, one guy suggested that I should bring a diesel generator into the backcountry. Obviously, that was not really a viable option for a backpacking trip. In the end, it was a member of the expedition, Stuart, who kind of came to the rescue. He's an electrician and he works for a hydroelectric company. He borrowed a set of industrial batteries from his workplace and just lent them to me for the summer. And they worked great. I mean, they were basically these industrial solid-state batteries. They were already fully charged, so I just charged my batteries off of those batteries. The only drawback was they were very heavy. It was about 25 pounds that I had to carry on my back along with all my camping equipment through the valley. So, a lot of just thinking about the production was just trying to solve these basic logistical issues. And then there was just other, buying lots of extra camera batteries just in case, lots of storage cards for the camera, trying to anticipate how much footage I'd be shooting. The other shooting issue that I had to think about was drone footage, because, in pretty much all wilderness documentaries these days, there's always drone footage. I mean, drones are so powerful and they produce such beautiful footage that you can't really get around it. You really have to have one. So once again, Stuart came to the rescue. He had bought his own drone and was going to bring it along. He had learned how to use it. We're going to shoot footage with his drone. And so that was great. I didn't have to spend more money, and I didn't have to train myself on another camera, and it was going to be taken care of. So the first day of the expedition, we basically took a boat ride. It was 8 hours long, going up Butte Inlet, which is like a fjord, going up towards the Hamatko Valley, where the expedition would begin. And Stuart got out the drone to do some footage of the boat. And it was going great. We were getting some great footage. And we were just about to put the drone away. And Stuart said, let's do one more shot. Let's send up the drone and we'll make it circle around the boat. I thought, okay, that sounds cool. And so he launched the drone and it went straight into the water and disappeared. And we never saw it again.
Oh man, that's a bummer. Yeah, because I had that in my questions. I was like, how come there's no drone footage?
Yeah, that drone is at the bottom of the Pacific now. And we couldn't get any footage out of it. I mean, the drone transmits footage straight to your cell phone, but we couldn't retrieve any. So it was a real shame.
Yeah, it's too bad. Somebody should think of an idea to put like a little mini flotation device on them so they don't sink.
Yeah, they really should. I mean, we kind of wondered what had happened, and I think Stuart called the manufacturer after the expedition, and we figured what had happened was the water was pretty choppy, and so basically we were launching the drone while we weren't stable, and it confused the drone's gyroscope, and that's why it flew into the water.
So you mentioned that you were carrying 25 pounds of batteries on your back, but you're the one person that we don't see in the film because you're behind the camera and everybody else is in this vintage gear. So I was wondering, what about you? Are you in this vintage gear with these vintage backpacks as well?
No, I was not in vintage gear. I was in fully modern gear. I have a modern backpack and I was wearing modern clothes. I was wearing a Gore-Tex jacket and synthetic dry fast pants and modern hiking shoes. From my previous experience filming these mountaineering reenactments, I could see how incredibly uncomfortable the participants were wearing these woolen pants and woolen jackets and woolen long johns. And I thought, I just couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it.
Yeah. Oh man, the mosquitoes in the tent. And the one guy, he commented, he had to stay in his sleeping bag even though it was so hot just to keep the mosquitoes off of him. That sounded so miserable.
Oh, the mosquitoes were brutal. They were absolutely brutal. I actually think it caused a bit of tension because in the evenings I could go into my modern tent with my modern mosquito netting and escape the mosquitoes and have a comfortable night's sleep, while they were stuck in these vintage tents with no protection from the mosquitoes. To this day, Brian and I still can't agree on it. Like, I believe the Mundays actually had mosquito netting in their tents. I mean, this was the post-World War I era. You know, it was the industrial era. If you look at some of the photos of Don and Phyllis Monday, they're wearing mosquito nets over their heads. So they're wearing bug nets over their hats and heads. I can't imagine that they wouldn't have them in their tents too.
Yeah, I guess my line of thinking is maybe you don't see it in the photo, but if it's available during the era, why not use it?
Well, that's my argument, but it's almost impossible to prove. And the only real evidence we have are the photographs of the tents, and you can't see the mosquito netting, but then again, you wouldn't necessarily see it. I mean, it would be tucked away somewhere. There's a sentence, or there's a paragraph in Don Monday's book about the expedition. He says, you know, there's a certain type of mountaineer, an outdoors person who wants to suffer just for the sake of suffering. And he said, I don't see any point in that. It's really foolish to want to suffer just for the sake of suffering. You really want to minimize your suffering in the wilderness. And that was really his philosophy. I couldn't say that that's Brian's philosophy as well.
One of the things that I didn't quite understand about the film was the two guys in the helicopter and what their role was going to be. Can you kind of explain what they were supposed to do? So
the two guys who flew in by helicopter into the mountains, they were our support team. The names are Ron and Mark. And Ron and Mark are two very experienced amateur mountaineers. They've spent a lot of time in the mountains. They're very experienced climbers. And they had all the modern gear, modern climbing gear. And the idea of having a support team was that they would be in charge of me. I would be roped up to them, and they would take care of me while I was filming, so nothing would happen. And they also had a secondary role, which was to be a kind of a safety backup for the expedition members. So if the expedition members using vintage gear had an accident, if they fell into a crevasse, for example, then Ron and Mark would be there with modern gear to help with the rescue. Yeah, so basically, just to sum up, they were there to basically take care of me in the mountains because I'm relatively inexperienced as a mountaineer, and also I'd be filming, so I wouldn't really be able to.
You wouldn't necessarily be paying as much attention to the climbing, so these guys are there to help you out. Sure.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. Yeah.
By the way, I love the movie. It's really good. It's very entertaining.
Oh, well, thanks. I'm really glad you enjoyed it. It's actually really fun to put together because I could see all the themes sort of developing and the characters developing, and I could see where it was all going. And the story just felt very, very emotional to me. And it's just really fun.
Yeah, people need to see the film to understand the vintage gear starts to kind of fall apart, and there's problems begin immediately. But one of the things that I was really surprised at was, and maybe this has to do, you edited a lot of this out, but I was like, I would be dropping F-bombs on probably day 2 of this thing. And I didn't hear any in the movie until almost the end. So were people really able to hold their emotions together for almost the full 3 weeks?
Oh, that's a really good question, because we actually did have a crisis much earlier in the expedition than you saw in the film. The problem was I just couldn't get it on tape. What happened was we were going through a really, really difficult and challenging part of the valley. It was very swampy, and at the same time, it was also very hilly. We split up into 2 groups. Joe collapsed from heat exhaustion at one point, and although he recovered, I think after that he wasn't feeling very good. And I think it was the following day, we were coming back from carrying packs forward on the trail, and we got separated. Joe got separated from the rest of the group, and he kind of disappeared for about 3 hours. And we got back to camp, and we were kind of panicking because Joe wasn't there. We had no idea where he was. We were trying to decide whether we should press the SOS button on my InReach device and call for help, and we just didn't really know what to do. Anyway, he wandered into camp just after dark. He was very angry. He was very upset. A lot of the tensions that he'd been feeling kind of came out at that point. We had a very, very tough discussion around the campfire that night. He had again suffered from heat exhaustion and made his way to a nearby river and drank from the river. And he'd spent some time on his own, and he'd felt really at peace with himself for the first time since he'd been on the expedition. So there was a lot of tension, and we tried to resolve it, but we could see that tensions were building between Joe and Brian and Joe over the expedition. But that whole incident, I didn't get it on camera, so it's not in the film.
Well, I can see why. I mean, trying to move through that rugged terrain with the equipment that they had, just wow. I mean, quite the challenge.
It was very challenging to move through that terrain, and the geography of that valley is very, very difficult. I mean, there were times when you'd be squeezed between the river on one side and the mountains on the other, and there's only this fairly narrow strip of terrain in between, and it's a hill, and it could be like a 45-degree incline, and it's littered with giant fallen trees, giant tree trunks, 5 feet in diameter, and giant rocks, and you have to, crawl under them or scamper over them, and it goes on for miles. I mean, there's no quick way to get through it. It's incredibly difficult. It's also kind of dangerous when you're carrying 50 pounds on your back, and there was just no way around it.
So around 21 days in, the team decides to call it quit because they realize they're running out of food, they're running out of time, they're not going to make it. And so we'll just say that's kind of the end of the film. So now you as a filmmaker, you get back to your home base and you have to begin piecing this together. How much footage did you end up having to sort through, and how long did it take you to kind of get your first good edit of the film?
I came back with just a huge amount of footage. I never counted it, but it must have been well over 100 hours of footage. And a lot of it was sort of very repetitive, people walking, people hiking. A lot of the footage, there was not really very much going on. The thing that's really difficult about shooting a film like this is it's very hard to be shooting when something actually happens. Like, basically you'll have your camera in your camera bag and something will happen and you'll get it out and it's too late. The thing has already happened. I knew I had some good moments in the footage, and once I was back in Montreal and I had these 100 plus hours of footage, the thing I had to do first was really to sit down and transcribe all the interviews and watch all the footage and make notes on all the footage.
What software do you use to edit?
So I use Adobe Premiere Pro. Yeah, one of the things I had to do when I started looking at the footage was I realized I'd have to upgrade my computer. My laptop couldn't handle 4K footage, so I had to buy a new laptop. I'd never really used Adobe Premiere Pro before, so I had to learn how to use it. So I had to go through all the interviews and transcribe them because I like working from transcripts. It's just a very, very easy way to work. And then I had to go through all the footage. And what I did was I just did selects of the footage that I liked. So I just took the footage that I liked, I selected it, and I put it on just one long timeline. So I had this one long timeline, which must have been, I can't remember how many hours it was, but one long timeline of all the good shots and all the good moments that I picked from all the footage that I'd shot. That was kind of my starting point. So once I had all the interview transcripts, actually I should add another detail. I came back from British Columbia with probably over 100 hours of footage. I hadn't really done any long formal interviews with any of the participants. I'd done short interviews in the wilderness. Like if something had happened, I would do a quick interview with the person and maybe 5-10 minutes, and that would be it. But I realized I needed to do some long formal sit-down interviews with everyone to get the full story because I really wanted the characters to narrate the film themselves. And so the first couple of months after I got back from British Columbia, I basically sat down with each of the members of the expedition one at a time and interviewed them in a kind of a formal sit-down interview. These interviews were usually at least 2 hours long. So the first job was really to transcribe these long sit-down interviews.
These interviews that you did after the fact, how much time went by between the end of the expedition and these interviews?
I tried to do these interviews fairly quickly after the expedition. So I did these interviews within 2 months of the expedition.
And then you're mentioning that you're doing these transcripts of the video. Does Premiere Pro allow you to somehow tie these transcripts to the video itself once you import it into Premiere? Or how do you tie them together?
No, unfortunately it doesn't. You can do that with other systems. With Avid, I have a friend who does that. There are systems that can do that, but basic Premiere Pro, I don't think you can. So really what you're doing is when you're doing your transcripts, you're just writing down time codes, lots and lots of time codes, so that if you have a piece of dialogue that you really like, you can easily find it in the footage. So transcribing and going through all the footage, that probably took about 4 months in total, really working full time. It's really grueling work. It's very painstaking. It just feels like it takes forever. But once that was done, things started to move a lot more quickly. Once I had transcripts, I could write a script. I wrote the script in about 10 days. And once I had a script, I could start putting the documentary together. My first edit took about 6 weeks of full-time editing. So it went pretty quickly because I really knew by that point with the script, I knew exactly what I wanted, and I had a good idea of where the shots were and the footage that I needed, and it went pretty quickly. The final film didn't really change that much from that initial cut.
I'm just curious about the money parts of this, because I don't believe there's huge money in these sort of adventure films, and you're spending a lot of time on this. Are you kind of not worried about the money, or is this just a labor of love type of a project for you?
Yeah, no, it really is a labor of love project for me. You know, my day job is as a writer, but I've always really wanted to directing and really directing your own film from scratch and editing it. You're painting on a much bigger canvas. So, yeah, no, I didn't get any financing for this film. I applied for it, but got turned down in several places. The only support that I got really was from the Royal British Columbia Museum. They gave me support in kind with their archives. They basically licensed their archives to me free of charge. That was worth a lot because I used a lot of archives in the film. It was fantastic. But no, I didn't get any financing for it. I think like a lot of filmmakers, I went into a bit of debt to make the film and will be paying it off. You know, when you embark on a project like this, you don't necessarily expect to get a direct financial return. But it may lead to other projects. It may lead to other opportunities, to other jobs. And so that's kind of my hope for this film.
What was the most challenging part of this project for you?
So the most challenging part of this project for me was really just shooting it. It was a really, really difficult and at times miserable experience. When we first arrived in the Hemp Valley, really the first day of shooting, I was convinced that I wanted to go home. I actually told Brian, look, I can't do this. I'm going home. This is just really not fun. It was just incredibly miserable. I felt that way on day 2 and day 3. I could just tell that it was just going to be a month of absolute misery. but I was shooting all the time, and I knew that I was getting good material, and it was so beautiful there, and the landscapes were so beautiful, and I felt like I just have to keep going because I knew that I was getting good material, and the filmmaker in me just wouldn't let me quit.
Yeah, there's that scene in the movie where I think it's Joe who's looking like at a waterfall in the middle of nowhere and thinking like, how many people have seen this in the last 100 years? How many people have been here to see this? There's some beautiful landscape there that I could see how that's a big motivator to be there as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, the landscape really is spectacular. I mean, the irony is we didn't actually see that much of the landscape because we're in the rainforest most of the time. It was like walking through a tunnel of trees. And then occasionally there would be a break in the rainforest and we'd find ourselves in this incredible vista, these like breathtaking landscapes. And then occasionally we'd come across these exquisite waterfalls and cascades and streams. You could drink out of them. It was clear, cold, glacier water. It's just an incredibly beautiful place. And very few people ever go there. There's a kind of magic in being in a place where no one goes, walking through a place where you know no one else is gone. There's something really unique about that. It's a really special feeling.
I wondered in the movie, what is your favorite like shot of the movie? I'll tell you my answer. What I think, like my favorite shot of the movie, I think is right in the beginning. I love the boat, like the shot of the boat coming up the inlet. I think that's pretty cool.
I think my favorite shot of the movie, and I only really realized this later on when I was looking at it on my computer while I was editing. I think my favorite shot is when they're standing at the river where the river has washed out the road and they can see Mount Waddington way, way off in the distance. And they know that's where they have to get to. And it's just incredibly far away. And there's no obvious way to get there.
That is a good one. That's kind of the turning point in the film too, where all of a sudden it goes from relatively easy to now incredibly difficult.
Oh, that's exactly it. Because that's where, at that point, we're at the end of the road. And that's when the really difficult terrain started. Like we had to go up onto this ridge. It was just littered with rotting trees and the footing was terrible. And we're carrying all this weight on our backs. And it was really dangerous. I mean, one false move and for sure you were going to break a leg. Brian did something which really, really irritated me. Like we were, trying to find our footing on this incredibly tricky terrain. And he says, wow, I feel like Don Munday. And I don't know why, but it just made me really angry. Because I was like struggling to like not break a leg.
Overall, what was your most fun part of working on the project?
Well, the most fun part of working on the project was definitely editing it, because the editing, I edit really quickly, and these scenes and these sequences would come together really quickly. And I would approach these scenes and I would know what I want out of them and I'd edit them and they would work. And it was just such a, I'd be on a high. Like, this is so great. The scene works exactly the way I wanted it to. Like, for example, there's a scene where Brian's looking for a road to get to a bridge that we have to cross to get through the valley. And he goes up this mountain road and it's leading nowhere and we're getting completely lost. And we just wasted 2 hours of our day. I remember shooting that and thinking, gosh, I really hope this scene works. And then when I put it together on my computer, it worked so perfectly. Like you can just tell that he's lost, he's going nowhere, this road is going nowhere. It's just a dead end. And it works so perfectly. And I had so many moments like that editing the film. But I should also say that my other favorite part of making this film was meeting Rob Wood, who's an elderly British mountaineer who lives in British Columbia. Rob Wood's a really special person. He's a professional mountaineer. He climbed with Chris Waddington, the greatest British mountaineer of the 20th century, who climbed the north face of the Eiger and the first British expedition on Mount Everest. Rob was just a very interesting person. He's climbed a lot in the Waddington Range. He's one of the few mountaineers to have ever done so. He knows it really, really well. He's also a very spiritual person. He talked to me about these transcendent moments that he'd had in the mountains where he kind of felt a sort of a universal nature, connected to a universal nature. He's just a very, very special person. And I just felt so lucky to have met him and got a chance to talk to him.
Yeah, I want to make a comment about that because that was, I think, an important part of the film because it kind of provided some like an anchoring, so to speak, because he was saying with his experience, this is going to be very, very difficult to do. And it proved to be true.
Oh, he was absolutely right. Rob Wood actually came to talk to us the day before we set out on the expedition. And he basically told us flat out, there's no way you're going to reach Mount Waddington and climb it. There's just no way. If you can make it through the valley and get up that first hill into the mountains, you'll be laughing. But I doubt you'll get even that far. And he was absolutely right. He's one of the few people who really, really knows that area very, very well. He used to climb in that area in the 1970s when the entire Hemp Valley was being logged, and there were logging roads going all through the valley. And all you needed to do was to catch a ride on a logging truck, and you'd be through the valley in 20 minutes. We hiked for almost a month through that valley, and we only got 2/3 of the way through it. And it was hard going. So it's a very different experience trying to get through that valley now than it was in the 1970s.
There seems like there's some talk online, at least on the website, or maybe some video that I saw, that there's going to be an attempt to go back in 2021 to finish the climbing part. Is that true?
Yeah, that's right. Brian's planning an expedition this coming summer, if COVID permitting. His plan is to helicopter into the mountains, skip the valley entirely, just go straight into the mountains, basically land very close to where the support team was based, and then go from there. So it would be 3 weeks in the mountains. I think it's about 30 kilometers to get from there to Mount Waddington. And the plan is to climb Mount Waddington and finish the expedition.
Are you going to be involved?
Yes, I'm hoping to be involved. I'm hoping to go along as the filmmaker again. It kind of depends on my work schedule. If I have the free time, if I can go, I certainly will go, with some hesitation, because I know it's going to be really difficult. Spending 3 weeks living on the glaciers at that altitude will be very, very challenging. It's really a completely different world up there. I mean, I've been to a mountaineering camp in the Rocky Mountains, and that was just 5 days. And we had lots of comforts and lots of luxuries that we won't have in the mountains next summer. So it's going to be really, really difficult. But that's partly what attracts me to it, because I've never really spent that amount of time in the mountains. I want to see how I cope with it. It's a very special place, and to be able to spend that amount of time in the mountains is a really unique experience.
Do you know if this film, The Mystery Mountain Project, is going to be shown any film festivals in 2021?
Well, I certainly hope so. I'm submitting it to a bunch of different festivals. So far, it's been accepted at the London Mountain Film Festival, but I'm hoping it'll be in quite a few other festivals in 2021. I held it back from festivals last year because I didn't really want to enter it into online film festivals. I was really hoping to attend in-person festivals just because it's just a lot of fun to be there with an audience while they're watching it and to be able to answer questions afterwards and meet people. So I'm really hoping to have that experience this year.
Yeah, well, congratulations on getting the film done. Like I said, I really enjoyed it. It's a great film. I encourage people to go check it out.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Where do people go to find it online?
They can just go on Amazon. It's on Amazon in Canada and the United States and the UK and Japan. It's also on a few other platforms. There's one called Adventure Sports TV, which is also an online platform. There's a platform called Reelhouse and Vimeo On Demand, so it's there as well. The easiest place to find it would be on Amazon.
Before we wrap up here, I saw in your bio that you had worked as a canoe trip leader in Algonquin Provincial Park. And I wanted to ask you, and I don't know the length of time that you did this, but do you have any kind of crazy stories from being a trip leader?
Yeah, there's lots of stories from being a trip leader in Algonquin Park.
Do you have one that you can share?
Yes, yeah. Oh, there's some that I couldn't really share, but there's some that I can share. I guess it was just a few years ago. It was 2017. I was on a trip with some 13-year-olds and some other staff, and we were on a lake called Lake Lemure in the northern part of Algonquin Park. It's a very, very isolated lake, and we're about halfway through our trip. It was a 9-day trip, and we're paddling along the lake. We have these aluminum canoes. They're Grumman canoes. They're made by the same company that made the World War II era fighter planes. And off on the horizon, there's a storm coming and we see lightning. And you really don't want to be in the water in metal canoes during a lightning storm. So we got to shore really quickly and we found a clearing and we did what's called a lightning drill. So we all sat down on our life jackets, evenly spaced out in this clearing. to reduce the risk of, if we get hit by lightning, that it'll sort of go through our bodies into the ground. And so we're basically in lightning drills, sitting on our life jackets and waiting for the storm to hit. And it's a very strange moment in a way because we can't really move, we can't really do anything. And there's a strange kind of beautiful light in the clearing. It's almost like twilight, but it's the middle of the day. And I decide, well, to pass the time, maybe I'll just make lunch. And so I get out. Our lunch is going to be peanut butter and jam sandwiches. And so me and my friend Omar, we start making these sandwiches. And suddenly the storm hits and there's lightning strikes all around us. We see a tree get hit by lightning and it glows red. I've never seen that before. It's incredible. But then the lightning starts to strike a lot closer, within 20 yards away. It's terrifying. You can feel the lightning, the thunder in your rib cage. Most of the kids are being very brave. No one's saying anything. But then I look to the kid who's just sitting next to me on my right, and his mouth is open and his lunch is falling out of his mouth. And I realize he's completely terrified. Actually, two thoughts go through my head. This poor kid, he's terrified. And B, he's wasting that sandwich. Then the storm is really on us and there's a lot of rain. Like we get completely soaked, but we're safe. No one gets hit. It was just an incredibly beautiful and intense moment in time where we really thought we were going to die. We really thought we were going to get hit by lightning because it was very, very close. It was hitting trees within 20 yards. And, I was thinking, I really hope my fellow staff members remember their CPR from first aid, because if I get hit, I'm pretty sure I'm going to need it.
Yeah, that's scary when that stuff happens. That reminds me of the times when people are out in these wilderness areas when these, I forget what they call them, these like derechos, these massive high windstorms come through and just knock down all the trees, and you're stuck in this jumble of trees.
It's very strange, being a city dweller and then getting out into the wilderness and just feeling so exposed, even just in a lightning storm. And you realize how our ancestors must have felt. Nature is just so completely awesome, and you're completely insulated from it, in the city.
Well, Greg, where are your interests going to take you next?
I'm hoping my next project will be a feature film, a fiction film. I'm adapting a memoir by a Canadian soldier who served in Afghanistan. I'm adapting it into a feature script, and I'm hoping to be able to make that film next. It's a completely different subject. It's a completely different type of film. I'm a former reservist in the Canadian Army, and I have a lot of friends who served in Afghanistan. I didn't, but I know a lot of people who did, and they came back with very, strange and moving and terrible stories of their service there. I'm hoping to bring them to screen at some point.
Are you hoping to direct?
I am hoping to direct. I've never really directed fiction film before, but I'm very inspired by, there's a German filmmaker, Werner Herzog, and he said something that I read about, and it really clicked with me. He said that he makes both feature films and documentaries, and he says that he directs his documentaries like they're fiction films, and he directs his fiction films like they're documentaries. And I thought, yes, yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly what I want to do.
Greg, how can people get a hold of you if they want to learn more about the film?
People can go to the Mystery Mountain Project Facebook page. You can get a hold of me through that. They can also go on the Canadian Expeditions Heritage Society webpage. It's got links there to the film trailer, and you can contact me through that webpage as well. So there's lots of ways to get a hold of me. I'm also on Facebook, just my regular name. I'm on Twitter, just my name, Greg Gransden.
Greg Gransden, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing the story of putting together the Mystery Mountain Project. It's a great movie. I really enjoyed it. I encourage people to check it out. Like we mentioned, you can find it on Amazon and other places like Vimeo. So thanks again for coming on the show. Well,
thank you, Paul. I've really, really enjoyed it.
Thanks again for listening. This episode was recorded on January 28th, 2021. If you'd like to send me some feedback or comments about the show, you can do so. My email address is paul@thepursuitzone.com. If you want to send in a voice message and perhaps get a chance for your voice to be on the show, you can do so by using your phone to record a message and send me an email, or you can also head over to speakpipe.com/thepursuitzone. The best way to support the podcast is to subscribe and share it with your friends. You can subscribe anywhere you get your podcast audio. For more info and to sign up for the newsletter, head on over to thepursuitzone.com.